The Nintendo Wii was a revolutionary game console that changed many people's perception of what a video game actually is. Nintendo's decision to focus on the unique gameplay experience over graphics horsepower certainly paid off, as it drew an entirely new group of gamers, some of which had never even held a game controller before. Unfortunately, Nintendo's decision to not focus on graphics horsepower resulted in an analog-only output with a less than stellar video quality that left us really no options to get better video out of it. Like, none at all. Until now. The Nintendo Wii launched in November of 2006, within days of Sony's PlayStation 3 console. When the PS3 launched, it came with an HDMI port that outputted up to 1080p, and it could even play both Blu-ray and DVD discs. Alternatively, when the Wii launched, it came with a composite video cable, could only do 480p via component, and couldn't even play DVDs. Now, I realized that the PS3 was twice the price of the Wii, and once again, Nintendo's main focus was on overall user experience and not video output options. That being said, I was still really disappointed that we didn't get anything other than what the GameCube already outputted. It was great that the component cables for the Wii were cheap, but it was still just a 480p image. And I realized that in 2006, many people were still using CRTs as their main display and didn't even have the option of 480p, but I really wished Nintendo had a little bit more foresight, because no matter what, all you're stuck with is an analog signal, and pretty much right away, people started noticing that the analog signal from the Wii wasn't as good as the signal from the GameCube. In fact, that was one of the first picture comparisons posted on RetroRGB.com right when the site first launched. I really tried everything to get the best signal out of a Wii by trying different brand component cables, trying RGB PAL versions to see if the 240p or 480i output could be sharper, and I even tried tracking down different versions of the Wii to see if you can get that much better of a signal. And while there are versions of the Wii that output better than some others, none output quite as good as the original GameCube component cables, which, as far as I can remember, is the first time I know that a console manufacturer has released a new version of a console that doesn't output as good quality as its predecessor. But luckily, we finally have a good choice for high-quality video output. A digital-to-digital HDMI solution for the Wii called the Wii Dual. This kit was designed by Dan Koons, aka Citrus 3000 PSI, and is based on Unseen's GC Video solution, which takes a true digital-to-digital conversion of the original output resolutions of the Wii, ranging from 240p to 480p, and outputting them via HDMI. The Wii Dual doesn't just add HDMI capabilities, it also upgrades the analog output port to have the same high-quality analog signal you could expect from any GC Video solution. That means really high-quality component video output, and even high-quality RGB SCART outputs enabled, meaning you could use this with your existing SCART solution all the way up to 480p. Also, the Dual can simultaneously output from an HDMI and analog ports at the same time. That means streamers will have a much easier time gaming on a CRT and then just sending your HDMI signal right to your capture card. Alternatively, you don't have to mess with different setups if you use both CRTs and digital flat screens at home. You could just have cables going to both and use whichever monitor you feel like. Now that you're familiar with what the Wii Dual is, I'd like to show it in action. I have it connected to my capture card via HDMI cable running in 480p, and I'm going to bring up the on-screen display using a connected GameCube controller. This is just a basic button combination, and this menu can be accessed by an infrared remote, which could also be paired via a button in the back. Now, I'll go through these settings in detail later, but the one that you're going to want to really check out at first is Other Settings, because this allows you to select between RGB and component video for analog output. And once you have that selection made, you can go back and make sure that you store settings, because if you don't hit the Store Settings button, they will reset to default when you power the console off. Other than that, they have a few other settings as well as scan lines, but I'm not really going to get into that right now. I really just want to show footage of this thing working. So let's start with some New Super Mario Bros. Wow, this looks absolutely amazing. I'd seen some of the Wiis that output better video quality compared to the original launch models, and it's definitely a small improvement. Also, I had seen pictures of the VGA mod, and that also looked good, but the bottom line is you're using Nintendo's built-in digital-to-analog converter, whereas this is a true digital-to-digital solution, so you can get the sharpest picture and the cleanest colors. Well, I could certainly tell just by looking at it. It's not as huge of a difference as something like 480i to 480p, but it's something I could see just by watching the characters run on the title screen. One other quick thing to show is that with a true digital-to-digital solution, there's no analog noise whatsoever. Now, this is noise that you would see on any analog output, but it just proves the point even further that if you're going into an HDMI or really any digital display, having a true HDMI solution is always going to be a tiny bit better than analog. I think a lot of people were also curious as to how the analog video was upgraded compared to the stock solution. I can definitely see a difference, and I think anybody who's really serious about their analog output quality would want to do this mod regardless if they use the HDMI portion of it. Any serious gamers that have high-end equipment like BVMs would definitely appreciate the quality boost, as well as the ability to use RGB as well. Some people might be thinking, well, this looks really cool, but can't I just use my Wii U? It's backward compatible and has HDMI output. Well, I'd always heard how bad the Wii U's output was, but I didn't really grasp how terrible until I started doing these side-by-side comparisons. I mean, everything's wrong with it. The aspect ratio, the amount of space filled in the window, and these are direct one-to-one captures. So it's not like I'm trying to capture in 720 or 1080, which that would make sense because the Wii U might not be able to handle the upscaling. But nope, I am capturing in the original 480p resolution and comparing it to the Wii Dual with its HDMI 480p resolution. Holy crap, what a difference. Before I get into some of the advanced stuff, I wanted to show one last demo, and it's a scenario that sounds complicated, but it's actually something that many retro gamers already have the ability to do. Since the Wii Dual outputs really high quality RGB analog signal, what would that look like line doubled through the open source scan converter? Now, of course, you could already do this with a stock Wii, but then you're really just doubling all of the noise and bad colors that you're getting. So I just want to show on the screen now how it looks with the high quality RGB output in 960p through the open source scan converter. Something that's pretty cool both for capturing and if you just want to play it on a flat screen monitor as sharp as you could possibly get it. So that's the basic overview of the Wii Dual. I wanted to know some more advanced information, so I contacted the creator of the project, Dan, and asked him to start by just explaining how the project started and what's it all about.
The Wii was I was really excited when Unseen first released the firmware for the Wii, that I thought that would kind of be the next jump past the GameCube, and then like 2 years later we're now finally almost here. I've gone through so many hardware revisions with this project that it's almost crazy that I kept it going. Because the first goal was I wanted to make it very simple to install, or simple as in possible, without soldering wires directly to the DAC. And it took quite a few iterations. I thought I got very close a couple times and got really excited, then realized that, this is not the right way to do it, and I finally found, the perfect setup to make this all work.
Next, I wanted to ask Dan if he felt that this was a project that anybody could install on their own, or if it's something that really should be left up to advanced installers with lots of experience.
I would consider this mod an advanced installers only. It's similar to the Ultra HDMI, but I would say it's not more difficult than that, but different steps. You have to solder to a small chip on 3 sides, or on the Ultra HDMI it's only one side. So you Pretty much, this is one of those things where you really can't mess that up. You can't burn the flex cable up. You've got to have a temperature controlled iron. You've got to have a multimeter that you can use to check continuity with if there is an issue. You need to also need to know how to actually use a multimeter.
The Wii Dual board itself looks very specially designed. I wanted to know if it would work on every revision Wii, or if you need to nail down a certain model number or motherboard revision.
Yeah, the Wii Dual was designed specifically around a certain board revision. There's actually been about probably 6 or 8 board revisions, but there's really only two main styles. The first style was the launch models, which was a 6-layer board, which runs hot. The newer, so I designed this for the newer boards, which is a 4-layer design that run much cooler and should last a lot longer. These boards these Wiis can easily be found in the wild, as they are black, light blue, and red, and also do have GameCube ports on some of the models. The later models have the GameCube ports removed. You can easily identify your Wii by removing the battery door. And if you look inside, you'll actually see a number to the right hand side, and it'll say 01, 20, 30, 40, 60. And these numbers correlate with the models. If you have an 01, a 20, or a 30, then that means the model is not compatible. So the 40, the 60, and the K01 and K02 models are supported.
Since the Wii Dual is compatible with some of the motherboard revisions that are also GameCube backward compatible, I wanted to know how the video output would compare to both the original GameCube component cables as well as the GC Video GameCube HDMI solution. In all of my GameCube testing, I found that the GC Video's component and RGB output was identical to the official component cables, and you did get the advantage of the HDMI output being a true digital-to-digital solution. So, just like the example I showed earlier with the red screen, you never get any of that weird analog interference that's always going to happen on any console.
Yeah, the output will be, if you have component cables already, or if you have component cables for the GameCube, or if you have a GC Video modded device on your GameCube, then the output is going to be identical. There will not be any difference.
We've talked a lot about video quality, but I wanted to ask about the audio as well. Since HDMI carries digital audio, I was curious if it was just an analog to digital conversion, or if it was a true digital to digital audio solution. I was also curious if the analog audio was affected at all as well.
The audio is pulled directly is pulled digitally from the right before the DAC on the Wii, so the audio is a true digital audio output. The analog output audio stays the same; it's unaffected.
Earlier, I showed how to access the Wii Dual's on-screen menu using a GameCube controller, but in most scenarios, using an IR remote would probably be a better option for some people, both because it's easier and wireless, and because certain Wii games turn off access to the GameCube controllers when in use. So I wanted to ask Dan a little bit more about the pairing process, and if there's a specific remote control that he recommends, or if you could just use any basic remote control.
Yes, you also can use a universal remote to control the OSD. It comes pre-programmed with the OSSC remote. You don't have to use that remote. There is a simple button on the back you just hold down, and it'll bring up an on-screen prompt to pair any universal remote to it. I recommend just, if you're in Wii mode, use a universal remote, and if you're in GameCube mode, just use a GameCube controller.
Now that we're talking about more advanced menu options, I wanted to walk through each of the screens. That way people could kind of have an idea of what to expect, and it really isn't nearly as confusing as it looks. Absolutely no disrespect meant to Unseen and the wonderful work he did on the GC Video stuff. I just think that the menu could really use a bit of explanation. So let's start by just walking through what happens when you first open up the menu. The first thing you might notice when you open the main menu is that it shows the line doubler and scan line settings for whichever resolution the Wii is currently set to. I think the reason Unseen programmed this into the menu is that you'll have instant and quick access to both the line doubler and scan lines, and you don't have to dig through menu options. But a great feature of the GC Video firmware is that each mode could have separate settings. So I'm showing all of the NTSC modes on the screen at the moment. Anybody in PAL regions will recognize that there will be 3 different resolutions. And not only can you program different for each modes, you can go into the category View All Modes and set them there as well. I'll walk through each of the 3 NTSC video modes just so you can get an idea of why you might want separate settings for each. I'll start with 480p, as that's probably going to be the most common resolution used with the HDMI output. So there's no line doubler feature on the 480p setting because the maximum output of the Wii is 480p. It can't do a 960 double. And you can add scan lines as well as adjust the strength and whether they're alternating. And to be honest with you, this is totally a matter of preference. It is my personal opinion that so many of the 480p compatible games look like high-def games and just by themselves without any scan lines look pretty amazing. But like I said, this is really up to each person, and maybe there's some of the modern games that might even look kind of cool with scan lines on. So for me personally, I would just leave everything off for this, but honestly just do whatever you prefer. Next, I'll talk about 240p, which is a resolution many virtual console games run in, which is also the original resolution of many of those games, like classic Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, or Nintendo games. The 240p settings could get a little bit complicated though, because in order to enable 240p mode, you need to first go into the Wii's menu and set it to 480i mode. I'm not really sure why Nintendo did this. I assume they probably did it just to make it easier for compatibility, and I guess they assumed if you're running in 480i mode, you probably have a CRT, which is 240p compatible anyway. But not to confuse things anymore, if you want to use 240p mode, which is the original resolution of many of the virtual console games, just set your Wii to 480i, and in my opinion, if you're doing analog output to a monitor or any kind of analog display, you'll want to leave the line doubler off so that it just spits out regular 240p resolution. This is perfect for anybody using the component cables or RGB cables to output the Wii to an RGB monitor. Also, if you want to output these virtual console games through HDMI, I would suggest leaving the line doubler on because it does a zero lag integer scale, a line double, to 480p. This really preserves the original look, and here's where you might want to turn the scan lines on. Some people really like the look of artificial scan lines on flat screen monitors, and this menu gives you the choice of how strong you want them and where they're positioned. Once again, if you're running just in straight 240p output mode to a CRT monitor, you definitely don't want scan lines on because the CRT is already making them for you. Interlaced resolutions can be found in both NTSC and PAL Wiis, and I wanted to ask Dan how the line doubler setting affects 480i and how the Wii Dual can get 480p from a 480i signal.
The 480i line doubler works with a lag-free Bob deinterlacing, and what that can do is I can add a little bit of jitter, but it is lag-free. A lot of TVs have good deinterlacers now though, so I would first plug it into your TV and see how it handles the signal. If you don't like it, try the Bob, or turn on the line doubler and see how it works for you.
Okay, that makes sense. The 480i deinterlacing to 480p that's built into the Wii Dual is designed to do it with zero lag, so you might not get as high a quality deinterlacing that's built into your TV, but be very careful because I've seen some TVs that do a beautiful job deinterlacing also add lots of lag to any interlaced resolution. So it's my suggestion that you just try both the deinterlacer built into the Wii Dual as well as the one built into your TV and see what's the overall better solution. Also, this is probably a good time to mess with the scan lines because with 480i resolutions, sometimes they help make it look a little better, sometimes they don't, and some people just don't like scan lines at all. I was a little confused by some of the options in the Other Settings menu, so I asked that Dan walk through each one and kind of give us an idea of what they do.
Sure, we can just go down the list of these settings. The very first one is the Allow 480p mode, and what that does is that actually kind of tricks the Wii into thinking that you plugged in a component cable to allow 480p. So if you go into the settings on the Wii under the TV resolution, you always have two options, and sometimes one's grayed out, and that one grayed out is 480p, and that's because it doesn't think you have a component cable plugged in. So that's what that setting allows you to do. Next one, the RGB limited range. Certain TVs have a different range of RGB. So normal like RGB output from a computer is 0 to 255, and a normal TV, let's say at home, is limited. So depending on what your TV does and how it detects it, you may need to turn that on or off. So if your blacks aren't black as possible, turn that off. The next setting, which is enhanced DVI mode, allows audio packets to be sent over the HDMI signal. So some TVs, I think it's a very, very small amount, like 1% of TVs have issues with enhanced DVI mode. That's why there's an option to turn it off. And then display is 16:9. What that does is that sends also another data packet to tell the TV that it's doing 16:9. So you can set up anamorphic widescreen with Wii, which I think a few games support, which will look pretty cool. The other one, mode switch delay, is kind of a timer on how long it waits to redo the video output when it switches from video modes. So if your TV kind of has a finicky pickup signal, it can wait to make sure it's searching again. I've really never seen a TV need this other than really used at all, so I always leave it at 0. The analog output, which is the next setting, controls what type of video output goes over the analog signal. So there's 4 options, which is RGB, RGSB or sync on green, YUV or the same as component, and then a direct component mode or DYUV as it's set in the menu. So the first 3 are pretty self-explanatory. The direct component is a little different, as in it outputs kind of a raw signal from the Wii before it hits any video processing in the GC video chain. So this would be pretty much what it does is it strips out the DVI reblanking, which gets added in for the HDMI signal. And this can kind of, I don't want to say wreak havoc, but can add some extra information that CRTs can't really deal with when outputting a custom homebrew resolution. In terms of just normal Wii games and GameCube games, you would want this to be not on direct, but it doesn't really matter, I guess. It really is only affected if you're going to use, honestly, I don't know of a game for the Wii that would use this, so maybe in the future if there's a weird custom resolution that gets outputted, it's available. And then the mode select is more also, which the next option, mode select, is going to be a way for a person who with more experience to be able to make a custom cable, so when they plug in a component cable, it auto jumps to this mode. So there's a pin that can be grounded on the multi-out connector, and when this pin is grounded, it can jump to this mode automatically. So for example, you leave the analog output on an RGB, so when you plug your SCART cable in, RGB automatically comes up. So let's say you plug in a component cable. When you plug the component cable in, it automatically jumps to component video. You don't actually have to go into OSD and switch it. So these 2 options are component or direct component, and that's kind of how that option works. Most users won't need to mess with this setting.
And lastly, I noticed that there was a picture settings menu that could change brightness and contrast, and I was wondering if that was some kind of filtering applied after the fact, if people need to worry about that, or if we should all just leave it at 0 unless there's a problem.
For the picture settings, this allows you to adjust the brightness, contrast, and those kind of standard features that are found on a normal TV. I personally wouldn't adjust them and just leave them at 0, as that's a true neutral picture. It would be more, I would say you would want to adjust the brightness if you're in a dark game and you want to be able to see through the cave and you kind of want to cheat. But other than that, they more just mirror what your TV settings already do.
And since the project's called the Wii Dual, my last question for Dan is how the dual outputs work. Are they independent from each other, or do they both output the same resolution at the same time?
The resolutions work in tandem to each other for both analog and digital. So, and they abide by the Wii settings in the TV resolution settings. So if you choose 480p in the Wii, both the digital and analog port will output 480p, and vice versa for the 480i as well.
So this seems like a good place to conclude this video on the Wii Dual. Overall, I think it performs excellently with a really high quality HDMI output that's a true digital to digital audio and video output. It's not an analog to digital conversion. So you end up with a much higher quality video output than the stock Wii, and potentially you can even get a better audio output because you don't have to worry about analog interference or anything like that. Overall, it's something that I would recommend for any Wii enthusiast or anybody that needs to do streaming or really just wants to play the highest quality of the Wii on a flat screen. Another thing I think people should consider is the GameCube support, because if you don't own a GameCube, or if you do own one but don't have any kind of GC video or the official component cables, this could actually be a huge cost savings overall. The fact that you should be able to play all of your GameCube games that's not emulation with original controllers through HDMI and analog at the same time is a huge advantage. Now, I'm sure a lot of people watching this were probably thinking, but can't you just get a good component video to HDMI converter? Maybe even run it through a component video splitter first so you could also have dual outputs, analog and digital? And the truth is, yes, absolutely. There are cheap, zero lag solutions that allow you to accomplish the same thing, but what you're really talking about here is quality. So it's my opinion that if you're just a casual Wii user that plays every now and then, the stock component video output is fine for you. This is really designed for people that require the highest quality dual output or really just want to get the best digital to digital signal out of their Wii. For me personally, the Wii isn't my favorite console, but I like the games that are on there enough that I really want to enjoy the best quality from it every time I play it. And that's really what this is focused on. People that are looking for quality, ease of use, and of course the advantage of having every output you could possibly use. Well, that does it for this video. If you'd like to see more footage of the Wii Dual in action, check out some of my friends' reviews. And if you'd like to stay up to date with everything going on in the retro gaming scene, check out my weekly podcast and subscribe to my channel. This video and all my others can only be made because of my amazing Patreon supporters, so if you like what you see, please consider signing up. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.